Go on then. Germany is that way. A Soviet guard says it like a joke and points into the white horizon. Karl Brenner, a starving German prisoner, finally hears the words he has begged for since Stalingrad. He is free to leave. No fence stops him. No dog lunges. No rifle fires. He takes a few steps into the Arctic dark, and 10 minutes later, he is running back through the snow, screaming to be let inside. Not because the guards chase him, because of what waits beyond the camp. What he sees out there turns freedom into a trap, and it exposes one brutal truth about war that most people never hear. Karl Brenner was 27 years old, a railway mechanic from Cologne, when the Sixth Army collapsed at Stalingrad in February 1943. Like tens of thousands of other German soldiers, he marched into captivity half-frozen and hollow-eyed. The Germans had entered the Soviet Union believing they would move fast and come home as victors. Instead, by the time Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered, about 91,000 Germans went into Soviet captivity. Karl survived the first months because he kept moving. He survived because an older prisoner named Otto Weiss shared onion peels and bad jokes. He survived because a Soviet camp doctor, Anna Petrova, looked at his hands one day and said, "These fingers still work. Keep them warm." By late 1944, Karl had been moved north until he reached the coal region around Vorkuta, more than 100 miles above the Arctic Circle. The camp sat in a world of black timber, iron wind, and snow that squeaked under boots like dry sand. In winter, darkness lasted almost the whole day. Breath froze on scarves, and soup cooled in minutes. The strangest part was this. The camp barely needed fences. A few posts stood near the gate. Beyond that lay miles of tundra, frozen marsh, and forest. The geography did the guarding. Soviet planners understood something simple. Men can climb a wall. Men can bribe a guard. Men cannot bargain with 40 below zero. Karl stared at the open edges of the camp and whispered, "That's not possible." Otto answered, "It is if nowhere is safe." And that was the first lesson. But it wasn't the worst part. Life in the Vorkuta camps ran on coal, hunger, and numbers. Wake-up came before dawn, though dawn barely existed. Work columns moved out in the blue-black cold. Men hacked coal, repaired track, hauled timbers, and counted breadgrams the way bankers count gold. Karl learned the arithmetic fast. 400 grams of bread if you met quota. Less if you failed. Soup when you were lucky. Hot water when you were not. A man could lose 20 pounds in weeks. A man could lose hope faster. Rumors still moved through camp faster than frostbite. "One more month," a prisoner said. "Home by Christmas," someone laughed. Everybody listened. What happened next made the place even harder to understand. Sometimes the guards let small work teams move without chains. Sometimes they let prisoners walk from barracks to washhouse with no escort at all. One guard, Sergeant Sergei Mikhailov, watched Karl staring at the open tree line and asked, "You think this means mercy?" Karl said nothing. Sergei shrugged. "Go east, you freeze. Go west, you starve." And same result. That line stayed with Karl because Sergei was not a cartoon villain. He was a tired man with cracked lips. He had fought near Kursk. His brother never came home. One night, while handing out tools, he told Karl, "My mother buried an empty coat." Then he walked away. Here's what they didn't know. That sentence did more damage than any shouted threat. Karl suddenly understood that the snow did not care which language they cursed in. Then everything changed when a transport arrived from another labor site farther north. The new men looked ruined even by camp standards. Their cheeks were gray. Their boots were wrapped in wire. One of them, a teenager named Emil Hartung from Dresden, kept repeating the same words. "There are no roads," he said, "only white." Otto pulled Karl close and muttered, "Oh, stop staring at the gate. Watch the new ones." Karl asked Emil what he meant. Emil swallowed hard. "A man ran last week." "Did he make it?" Karl asked. Emil looked down at his soup. They found him standing. But hunger does strange work on the mind. The more impossible escape seemed, the more Carl obsessed over it. He measured distances with his eyes. He tracked the wind. He noticed which guards smoked too long near the boiler shed. He saved crusts of bread in his mattress and hid a nail, a spoon, and a strip of cloth in his boot. Otto caught him once and hissed. "Don't be stupid," Carl snapped back. "I'd rather die walking." Otto stared at him for a long second. "You say that from indoors." In January 1945, the temperature dropped so low that axe handles cracked. Men came back from the pit with eyelashes sealed white. Anna Petrova went barrack to barrack checking feet. When she reached Carl, she saw the bread crusts under his blanket and knew exactly what they meant. "Throw them away," she said. "They're mine." "They're not enough." Carl looked at her and asked the question he had carried for 2 years. "How far to Germany?" Anna did not soften it. "Over 1,000 miles to Moscow, much farther to Cologne." Carl let out one bitter laugh. "So I'm already dead?" Anna answered, "Not yet." But that wasn't the worst part. The camp commander had started using freedom itself as a punishment. Men who complained too loudly got mocked at roll call. "Nobody keeps you here," a clerk would say. It turned the whole camp into a cruel joke. "Leave if you want." And step into the dark and let the Arctic finish the paperwork. Then came the morning Carl chose to test it. A blizzard had passed in the night. The world outside looked strangely calm, the sky pale as tin, the snow smoothed flat by wind. Work detail was delayed. Sergei stood at the gate smoking. Carl walked up with his heart hammering and said, "If I go now, will you shoot?" Sergei looked at him for a long time. Then he pointed west. "Go on then," he said. "Germany is that way." They had no idea what Carl would find after those first few steps. At first, it felt unreal. No siren, no shouted order, just the crunch of his own boots leaving the camp road. Carl kept waiting for the bullet, the dog, the hand on his shoulder. Nothing came. The air tasted like metal. Wind scraped over the snow in thin, dry sheets. Behind him, the barracks already looked small. He walked maybe 200 yards. Then he saw the poles. A line of rough wooden markers ran across the plain toward the mines, half buried in drifted snow. At a distance, they looked ordinary. Up close, they carried scraps of cloth, broken straps, and one single boot nailed to the top of a post. Carl stopped cold. These were not trail decorations. They marked where men had dropped in earlier storms, when the road disappeared and the living needed something to follow back. A little farther on, the white ground rose into a low ridge. Carl climbed it, breathing hard, frost forming in his beard. When he reached the top, the world opened. There was no village, no rail station, no farmhouse smoke, no hidden road to Europe. Just endless white broken by black forest and the dark mouths of distant mine shafts. And moving across that emptiness came a sled convoy from the north, tiny against the snow, hauling shapes wrapped in canvas. Carl squinted. One canvas edge lifted in the wind. A hand hung out. He heard himself whisper, "No, no." Then everything got worse. Behind the convoy, farther than he could measure, another camp chimney pushed smoke into the sky. And beyond that, another thin black line cut across the white. Another road. Another outpost. Another piece of the same frozen machine. The camp he had left was not an island. It was one knot in a chain spread across the Arctic. Freedom was not waiting outside. Only more camp. That was when Carl broke. He turned and ran. Snow punched into his boots. The wind ripped tears from his eyes. He stumbled, got up, and ran harder. According to later accounts, he was yelling before the guards even understood what was happening. "Open it!" he screamed. "Open the gate!" Sergei grabbed him by the coat as he hit the entrance. Carl clutched the man like a drowning swimmer and shouted the only words he had. "It's all camp!" he cried. "All of it!" The yard went silent. Nobody laughed, because every man standing there understood exactly what he meant. They dragged Karl into the guard hut, sat him near the stove, and rubbed his hands until the pain came roaring back. Anna Petrova checked his eyes for snow blindness. Otto arrived minutes later, breathing hard, and stared at Karl's face. "What did you see?" Otto asked. Karl answered with a voice so flat it scared him. "At a distance." That word spread through the barracks by nightfall. Distance. Not wolves. Not ghosts. Not some secret execution pit. Something colder. The realization that the land itself had been weaponized. The Soviet state did not need bars everywhere. It had ice, hunger, and scale. If you think that's crazy, that is exactly why so many camps in the far north could function with surprisingly little fencing. Geography served as prison architecture. Karl stopped talking about escape after that. So did most of the men who heard him. But silence did not mean peace. It meant adjustment. He traded his hidden spoon for socks. He took the warmer position near the boiler trench when he could get it. He learned where to wrap cloth around his ears before the wind picked up. He listened when Otto joked. He listened when Anna warned. He even listened when Sergei spoke. One evening in March, while the sky flickered green with northern lights, Sergei handed Karl an extra half ladle of soup. "Don't thank me," Sergei said. "My shift ends." It was the closest thing to kindness either man could afford. But that wasn't the end of the lesson. Spring did not rescue them. It only changed the misery. Snow turned to black slush. Mosquitoes rose in clouds so thick men wrapped rags over their mouths. Coal mud sucked at boots. Then everything changed again after the war ended in Europe in May 1945. The guards did not open the gates. The Germans were still prisoners. They were labor now. The Soviet Union had lost millions of people and huge sections of its railways, factories, and mines. German POWs became part of the rebuilding. That fact hit the camp like a blunt tool. Men who thought peace meant a train home learned instead that peace could mean more years underground. Emil cried when he heard the news. Otto put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Breathe first, rage later." Karl said nothing. He had already seen what waiting outside looked like. Karl remained in Soviet captivity for years, like many German prisoners who disappeared into labor columns long after the shooting stopped. Some men died in the camps. The last large groups did not return until after West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's negotiations with Moscow in 1955. And even then, many families had already buried empty grief for a decade. When Karl finally saw Cologne again, the city looked familiar and broken at the same time. Church towers still stood. Whole streets did not. Idalk, his mother, cried at the station because she recognized his voice before she recognized his face. Otto never made it home. Emil did, though he refused winter travel for the rest of his life. Anna and Sergei stayed where history had put them, on the other side of a war that had chewed through everyone. Karl told almost nobody about the day he was set free. When he did speak, he used one line. Outside was bigger than prison. That sentence carried the whole century inside it. Empires had marched millions of men across maps, but in the far north, one prisoner learned the truth in 10 terrifying minutes. Sometimes the cruelest cage is the one that looks open. The irony is brutal. Karl spent years begging for the gate to open, only to learn that freedom without food, shelter, or distance is just another sentence. The war did not end cleanly for the men who vanished into camps. For many of them, it just changed shape. If this story hit you, tell me in the comments which moment got you most. And if you want more hidden history like this, subscribe now, because the next story is even harder to believe. Remember this line the next time someone says, "A prison needs walls." Sometimes the cold is enough.